Hey guys, it is so good to see you. Sorry I cannot be there. I am well. I am not sick. So spread the word, Mr. Mincer is okay. I'm actually videoing from my house. We should be used to this right now. We've been doing the COVID thing and everything else. Speaking of COVID and being at my house, this is my cat Elsa. Elsa, say hi. Don't be rude. Say hi to everybody. Yeah, she doesn't care. She's mean. It's so good to see you guys. All right, so good to hear from you all. I know that I cannot be there in person, but I'm praying for you, things to go well this week. Some good news about your teacher not being there is no test or quizzes this week. So congratulations on that. I do want you to do your homework and all the stuff that we're going to learn this week. We will worry about testing and quizzing next week when I get back. But I will be out all of this week. Just continue to pray for me and my family. And I pray for you all. We are going to be studying Israel, one of the best times in the history of all time and in your history books. So we'll look at 4.1 today, and we'll go through all of the sections this week. So the hope is we'll watch these videos. You guys will get to watch these videos, and I will try to highlight some things for you to take notes about. And that way you guys will be set up for success next week when we have our test. So I think you guys were given your homework assignment at the beginning of class. And any other assignments that you have, that those have already been given to you. So I trust that you guys are ready to go. So let's jump right in. So again, you can follow right along in chapter 4. Let me just go ahead and say that this is a really exciting time period in history. God has done something truly miraculous and wonderful in this particular part of history because we've been studying a lot of kingdoms. We've been studying the Babylonians and the Egyptians and the Assyrians and just lots of like groups of people. But up until this point, they've all tried to make their own nations, their own countries, their own peoples, and it's all been based on themselves. But this is the first time in recorded history where we're going to see a nation established truly under God. And here in America, we talk about that all the time, right? It's that we want to be a nation under God. In fact, you'll hear that a lot this week because we'll be reflecting on the events of 9/11. And you guys will have the chance to reflect and to think about, okay, what does that really mean, one nation under God? Because Israel attempted this, and we're going to see it for a little while. And so, and you guys, of course, will be studying in Bible class, and you'll be reading about this as well. But anyway, so let's just jump right in. So keep in mind that Israel has endured a lot at this point. Okay, the people of God were rescued out of Egypt. We were in Egypt last week, and we talked about how Moses rescues the people out of Egypt. The plagues hit, and Pharaoh's armies were destroyed in the sea. And then now we have reached the point where, okay, the people have gained their freedom, and they are basically coming to an area that's in the southern route to Canaan. And so they've come to a place called Sinai. And in this very barren land, this is where we get on a journey, a 40-year road trip where we travel with the Israelites, and they mess up big. They choose not to go into the promised land, and they're punished for that. And so God basically says, okay, this generation just doesn't get it. I know you all were enslaved, but maybe you spent too much time in Egypt. And so he's like, okay, other than Joshua and Caleb, the two spies that said, hey, let's go take the promised land, God punishes them, and he says, we're going to wipe this generation out. We're going to start over again. A generation will be raised up that will be dependent on me. And that's exactly what he does. Not only does he keep them alive, or does he recycle and start them over again, but he keeps them alive in the wilderness by feeding them literal manna from heaven. They are, water is provided through rocks, basically. And so God preserves his people, but again, he weeds them out. And so by the time they reach the promised land, by the time they get back to Canaan, they are thirsty. They are excited. They are literally singing songs of joy as God is now providing for them the land. And so, and again, this is unique because God is investing in his people. Now, we know this to be true because we saw in last week's discussion about Moses, we saw how God provided for the people, and he made a solemn promise with them. Now, you guys may need to go ahead and write this down. This solemn promise is called a covenant. It's in your textbooks on page 29 if you want to look up that definition, and it's spelled Covenant. I wish I was more technological savvy and I could put up the words for you guys, but you'll just have to take my word for it that's covenant for you. And so at Mount Sinai, he makes them this promise. And in this promise, he basically reaffirms what he told Abraham, that if they will follow and obey him, that they will be greatly blessed as a result of this. Okay. And so Israel basically starts off by saying, yeah, we declare that you, God, have taken control of us. It is in your power, your authority, and things start off really well. So they take the promised land, and then they form what we call as a theocracy. It's another word you need to know and need to write down. A theocracy is spelled Theocracy. And you guys can probably break down this word and understand. Theo is the word for God, study of God, and ocracy is the type of government. So that means that they are a kingdom ruled by God. Okay, now that's hard for us to understand because we're a democracy, we're a republic, and so we tend to think, okay, well, wait a minute, you have to have a physical leader, but God was the leader of these people. Now, He provided leaders to help in times of great need, and we call them judges, and I'll talk about them a little later on. But in this system, God basically sets it up through Moses and through the leaders that will follow in His footsteps. He's setting up this theocracy so that the people will only serve God. Okay. Now, along with this theocracy, that meant that they have to have like laws. Now, there's lots of laws in the Old Testament. You guys can open up the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus by itself has like 600 plus laws in it. And so there were all these like different commandments that they had to keep. And it was unique for them because, again, nothing like that had really existed. We've talked about Hammurabi's laws, how he had 300 laws, and there was some reflection of that in what God wrote. But again, God gives them these commandments. Now, specifically, He gives them what we call the Decalogue. And that's another word for the 10 Commandments. And in these 10 Commandments, God said, okay, here is these 10 things that I want you to do. But if you break down the 10 Commandments, basically, they break down even further. There's 600 plus laws, but then there's 10 commandments. But even in these 10 commandments, there's basically two things. And the first four of the 10 commandments, as you guys know or may know, is that the focus is on, okay, serve God. Love God. Don't put anything before Him. That's why it starts off by saying, okay, no gods before me, and worship or love the Lord your God. Honor the Sabbath, keep it holy. Do not speak the Lord's name in vain. These all have an emphasis on serving and worshiping and loving God. And that's what those commandments are. And then the next 6 commandments have a focus on loving each other. And again, you guys if any of you all are familiar with the New Testament, you already know that this is pretty basic common knowledge for us as Christians. Even Jesus was asked, okay, well, what's the most important commandment? Which seems like a really silly question because it's like, well, wait a minute, aren't we supposed to obey all of God's commandments? Aren't we supposed to obey all of God's laws? But Jesus gives this fantastic answer, and it's reflected here in the Old Testament in these 10 commandments because Jesus says to them, okay, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Everything you have, love God. But then He says, and then like that, the second commandment is just as great. Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, and love your neighbor. And so Jesus lays out for us in the simple terminology. Hey, we're supposed to love God. We're supposed to serve Him, and we have to love and serve others as well. And this is something we still fail at today, by the way. And the Israelites are going to struggle with this as well. Okay, so God sets up this Decalogue. He sets up these 10 commandments. He sets it up in a way. By the way, Decalogue, it's in your textbook. It's on page 30, Decalogue, and that's the third thing I would prefer you to write down. I also think that all of those 3 terms come up in your homework this week. So if you're paying close attention, I'm actually giving you some answers to homework. So don't tell everybody. That's just between you and me. Okay. All right. So going a little bit further than this. So after the wilderness, they come to Canaan, and the problem is they're going into the promised land. They're excited about this. But then Moses dies, which seems a little anticlimactic. This is the guy who rescued them out of Egypt. But if you read in the story of the Exodus, Moses loses his temper. He loses his cool sometimes. He mismanages some of the commandments that God gives him. Still a great man, still a very humbled and honored man, but he's not allowed to enter into the promised land. So they've got a unique challenge because now all of a sudden, Moses, who's been in charge for over 40 years now a new guy is taking command, and that new guy is Joshua. Now, Joshua's interesting. He's an interesting cat. He's not perfect either by any stretch of the imagination, but he's interesting because he's going to be one of 3 Joshuas mentioned in the Bible that's going to help to transition the people into a new promised glory. The first Eshua or Joshua appears here, where he takes people into the promised land. We're going to see another Eshua, Joshua, show up when the Babylonians or the Persians, have to go back and look at that, when they allow when y'all may remember we talked about this, and we'll talk about it more later. When they allowed them to return back to the promised land when they were in exile, that it was an Eshua, Joshua, that leads them back to that return, back to the promised land. And then if you look at, and a lot of people don't know this, but Jesus is actually translated Joshua, Eshua as well. And so, of course, it's Jesus that's going to lead us to the promised land, lead us to glory. All right, just off track a little bit. That's another sermon for another day, but I thought I would include that because Joshua is exactly who is going to be called to lead the people over the Jordan River, and they're going to approach the heavily fortified city of Jericho. And they're going to reach Jericho, and God is going to set the standard right away. He's